Welcome to this online tour of the exhibition E.A. Hornel From Camera to Canvas. This exhibition is a collaboration between the National Trust for Scotland and the City Art Centre in Edinburgh. It focuses on Scottish artist Edward Atkinson Hornel and shows that from 1891, the influence of photography can be seen in almost every facet of his painting. Photography provided Hornel with access to people, places and networks. It helped him build a visual library from which he could refresh his memory and take inspiration. He not only chose his subject matter based on his photographs, but also copied figures, poses and imagery directly from photograph to painting. Stylistically too, photography was significant. The vertical composition of many of the Yokohama Shashin prints that Hornel collected is mirrored in the composition of a number of his paintings. He would paint full scenes and then crop them, as if taking a snapshot of the most visually appealing area. Against the frenzied, blurred backgrounds of his paintings, the faces and hands stand out, painted with almost photographic veracity. The exploration of Hornel's photographic collection in From Camera to Canvas also reveals a more challenging hinterland to his paintings. His hundreds of photographs of Scottish girls, brought to his studio by their mothers and chaperoned by his sister Elizabeth, are discomforting to a modern eye, while many of those he took of girls and young women in Sri Lanka and Japan appear intimate or intrusive. Hornel was born in 1864 in the township of Bacchus Marsh, near Melbourne, Australia. His father and Yorkshire-born mother Anne had arrived in Australia in 1857 in search of a brighter future. The family lived in Australia for almost 10 years before returning to Kakubri in 1866. Hornel studied painting in Edinburgh from 1880 to 1883, an experience he did not enjoy, and followed this with a much more successful stint in Antwerp. Early in his career, Hornel was interested in painting rural Scottish subjects, generally in a naturalistic manner. He shared this interest with other painters associated with the Glasgow School. Kakubri, which is visible in the background of Harvesting, 1885, on the left, was Hornel's home for much of his life. In 1900, he purchased Broughton House there, where he remained until his death in 1933. He added a studio to the house in which to paint and take photos, and a gallery from which to sell his finished works. His friendship with fellow artist George Henry, 1858 to 1943, in the late 1880s and early 1890s, encouraged an interest in a more decorative manner of painting. However, from 1891 until his death in 1933, Hornel's style and subject matter were even more influenced by an interest in photography. His extensive photographic collection, now cared for by the National Trust for Scotland at Broughton House in Kirkcudbright, includes approximately 1,700 photographs used by Hornel to create his paintings. The composite image on the left shows Summer, 1891, from the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool. It is the first of Hornel's paintings that we can link directly to a photograph. You can also see the impact of his friend and fellow artist George Henry's bright, decorative style in this painting. The subject of Girls in a Landscape, painted here, is one Hornel would return to frequently. Henry and Hornel travelled to Japan together soon after, in 1893 to 94. Two Geishas, 1894, on the right, was produced by Hornel after their return from Japan and shows the influence of both Henry's decorative style and their experiences in Japan. Western artists, such as Vincent van Gogh, who studied in Antwerp with Hornel's teacher, Charles Verlat, and members of the Glasgow School, who Hornel and Henry associated with, were interested in and influenced by Japanese art. The vertical composition and flattened perspectives seen here, and visible in some of Hornel's early work, even before his first visit to Japan, show Japanese influence. The opportunity to travel to Japan was certainly important for Hornel's development as an artist, but perhaps not in the way he anticipated. Despite interacting with the Japanese art scene while there, his painting style did not become noticeably more Japanese. He appreciated experiencing Japanese culture during his visit, but the language he used to describe the country upon his return to Scotland was stereotyped and even infantilizing. He was explicitly disinterested in the modern political reality of the rapidly modernising country. However, one modern element Hornel did engage with on his first visit to Japan was photography. While in the country, he and Henry became members of the Photographic Society of Japan. They helped the society hang an exhibition of local Japanese and British pictorialist photography. They met numerous amateur and professional photographers as part of the society, both Western and Japanese. They certainly took and collected their own photographs, and may even have had the opportunity to attend society studio shoots. With the painting In the Orchard, painted after his return from Japan in 1898, we can see the influence of photography starting to become stronger. Although Hornel would become strongly influenced by photography in the future, in 1898 he was not yet consistently copying directly from photographs, and it would take some time before he relied on it fully. However, he was already taking numerous photos of girls in Kukubri, often in poses inspired by the photographs he had seen and collected in Japan. In this, he was assisted by his sister Elizabeth. Elizabeth was his housekeeper and chaperoned girls when they modelled for Hornel. She can be seen in the backgrounds of several photos, physically assisting with the modelling session or just looking on. Later in Hornel's life, she even undertook some of the work of applying paint to canvas for Hornel. Without Elizabeth's assistance, Hornel may have been less successful as an artist than he was. Accounts from some of the girls who posed for Hornel suggested it was considered a privilege to do so, and that they enjoyed the experience. Their mothers brought them to the studio, where Elizabeth would look after them, and the girls were paid for their time. However, as a prominent and wealthy male landowner in Kukubri, Hornel was in a position of considerable power. It is hard to ascertain how a working-class family would say no to allowing their daughter to pose for such a well-respected artist. The photos themselves bear witness to the unequal economic and social divide between artist and sitter, while also capturing the grubby, gap-toothed reality of the girls behind Hornel's floral fantasies. In many photos, girls submissively crouch or lie down, while in others, Hornel physically manipulates their heads or arms. By the time he painted Seashore Roses, circa 1907, Hornel had refined a way of composing paintings which he would use for the rest of his life. It consisted of girls with photographically clear features, their poses copied closely or even directly from photos, posed in front of a colourful background. In 1907, Hornel and Elizabeth travelled to Sri Lanka, then called Ceylon, to visit their cousin James. In the then British colony, Hornel was surprised by the cool green landscapes, which he photographed and recreated in his paintings. He photographed both pearl divers and tea pickers. However, only the young women picking tea, not the male pearl divers, made it into his paintings. Despite using his camera to faithfully record the people he saw, Hornel does not seem to have been overly interested in understanding the nuances of the culture he was experiencing. The camera enabled a casual interaction, allowing for quick snaps rather than slow sketching. In several paintings, Hornel combined poses and compositions from photos of disparate Sri Lankan activities. In Lace Makers, Ceylon, 1908, the central pose is from a photo of a Sinhalese girl making lace. while the composition seems to have been inspired by a photo of women playing drums. As with his Kakubri photos, this suggests he was more interested in using the shapes of Sri Lankan young women and girls to present an aesthetically pleasing, exotic fantasy for his audience than the reality of the country. Perhaps unintentionally, his Sri Lankan photos also reflect the inherently unequal conditions of the two main communities in the British colony. He photographed members of both the Tamil and Sinhalese communities, but did so in rather different ways. Hornel's photos of girls from the dominant Sinhalese community show them sitting demurely on woven mats. They are often in clean white clothing and captured spinning, playing the rabana drum, or even praying. By contrast, the Tamil girls are shown in dark clothes, squatting on bare earth, or, as in Ceylonese tea pickers, 1907 to 09 here, working hard in tea plantations. In 1920, Hornel and Elizabeth travelled around the world, returning home in 1921. During this trip, he visited Myanmar, a popular destination with Western travellers seeking a supposedly exotic location. Numerous travelogues documenting visits to the country were published in the 1890s and 1900s. Hornel wasn't the first painter to show an interest in Myanmar. British artist Gerald Kelly had visited in 1908 to 1909 and executed a number of paintings and sketches of the charming young ladies of Mandalay. Popular themes in the Western representation of Myanmar were the Mandalay dancers, who had fascinated Kelly, and the Irrawaddy River. Although Hornel created paintings of both these subjects, his only Myanmar photos are of dancers and musicians, suggesting he was once again using the camera to gather material for his photo library of poses of girls and young women. In focusing on the twisting bodies and cocked arms and hands of the dancers, Hornel's paintings like Burmese Maidens, approximately 1922 to 27 on the left, conform to the usual Western representation of Myanmar dancing. Upon his return to Scotland, Hornel seems to have photographed Scottish girls posing in ways that mimicked the Myanmar dancers. He was not concerned with the identity of his models, only the possibility of using their bodies to create a commercially viable, exotic version of reality. Hornel almost certainly reached Mandalay via the Irrawaddy River, but possibly for practical reasons does not seem to have photographed it. Water carriers on the banks of the Irrawaddy, 1923, on the right, supposedly represents the Irrawaddy in Myanmar. However, you can see the two girls seem to have been copied from Japanese, left, and Sri Lankan, right, photographs. The painting's vertical format also mirrors Japanese Yokohama shashin. Hornel collected many of these hand-coloured photographs of traditional subjects that were produced in Japan for the tourist market. Thus, the nominally Myanmar setting of these paintings does not provide any geographical or anthropological detail. The women and girls instead inhabit a non-specific foreign land that could easily be Sri Lanka or Japan. Their defining feature is merely their apparent exoticism to the Western gaze. Hornel travelled on to Japan from Myanmar. After this trip, the way he stitched poses from multiple photos together became increasingly less creative. In Three Japanese Peasants, 1921 to 25, the same model appears 3 times in the same painting. In the background is Mount Fuji, a stereotypical image of Japan, instead of the plain backdrop of the photos. While studio photoshoots in Japan provided Hornel with a dynamic range of poses, the Yokohama shashin Hornel collected were also influential. All 3 of these paintings, from approximately 1921 to 25, show the influence of Yokohama shashin. On the left, you can see how Hornel often adopted the slender, vertical format of these photos for his paintings of Japanese and other exotic subjects. He also took the subject of bijin, beautiful women, seen in Yokohama shashin, as inspiration. Although Hornel copied poses directly from photo to painting, he made subtle tweaks to appeal to his Western audience. The solemn figure in the photo smiles in the painting of her in the middle. Her muted kimono in the photograph is painted a more garish red in the painting. Rather than a screen, Hornel adds his signature frenzied floral background. This unfinished painting on the right shows how Hornel's painting practice may have been influenced by the photographic process itself. Like the markings on a photographer's contact sheet, the black lines show the area of the painting on which he would have focused. This change would also have made the composition feel more vertical and Japanese. One of the most notable aspects of Hornel's work is the uniformity of subject matter. He invariably, although not exclusively, painted girls and young women. This is reflected in the photos he used for his work, which are largely of girls or young women. His few photos of other subjects do not seem to have inspired any paintings. Hornel was not alone in extensively painting or photographing girls at the end of the 19th century. They were a popular subject to a degree that may provoke discomfort now. Artists such as John Everett Millais or Robert Herdman and photographers like Julia Margaret Cameron all engaged with the subject. However, Hornel did so to a particularly obsessive extent and exclusivity. Hornel's photographs certainly encourage us to look again at his paintings of girls. Those who came to his Kirkcudbright studio to be photographed were paid, brought by their mothers, and chaperoned by his sister. And it is important to state that there was not a hint of impropriety. However, the way they were objectified as they prostrate themselves under Hornel's direction for his camera undoubtedly makes for some uncomfortable imagery. The Toy Boat, Brighouse Bay, 1925, is a clear example of the most common subject in Hornel's paintings, that of girls against a floral background or landscape. Paintings like this have an air of sweetness and innocence. However, the photographic collection that inspired them, where his models are treated as objects and reduced to shapes or types, is often more complex. Hornel's style reached its ultimate expression in late paintings such as Brighouse Bay, Wild and Burnet Roses, 1929. The background of Brighouse Bay appears as a standardised backdrop in many of Hornel's works from this period. See also The Toy Boat. While his complete dependence on photographs for the figures of the girls is clear. In conclusion, this exhibition shows how much Hornel relied on the camera to create his paintings. He developed an almost mechanised method of composing his paintings based on the mechanical technology of photography. The extensive photographic library he amassed over 40 years across 4 countries allowed him to achieve this. As well as telling us more about how Hornel painted, analysing his photographic collection adds nuance to the way we think about what he painted. These intimate photos of poor, young women were the products of a white, wealthy, male gaze, often taken from a position of power. Hornel's photos show us how he subsumed the identities of women and girls within exotic, floral fantasies, while he grew wealthy on the swing of their hips, the flick of their wrists, and the tilt of their heads. The book E.A. Hornel, From Camera to Canvas, contains more in-depth discussion of Hornel, his paintings, and his photographic collection.